From the streets of ancient Rome all the way to our digital world today, political protest has always been this fundamental, really powerful, and yet often controversial part of the human story. It's how we raise our voices, it's how we challenge history. So, what exactly is it? How does it even work? And why does it matter so much? Okay, so at its very core, protest starts with a super simple but powerful idea. The word itself actually comes from the Latin protestare, which literally means to declare publicly. It's that moment you step out of your private thoughts and make your objection known to everyone. But just declaring something, that's rarely the whole point. It's almost always connected to a very specific demand, right? It's a pushback against something you see as an injustice, a bad policy, or some kind of oppressive system. It's not just saying, I object. It's saying, I object, and this has got to change. And this is where the real power kicks in. Protest takes individual frustration, which is honestly pretty easy to ignore, and it turns it into a collective voice. A single person's whisper becomes a roar that you just can't silence anymore, forcing the world to stop and listen. So let's really get into the act of protest itself. First, we're going to define exactly what we're talking about, and then we'll take a look at just how far back in history this whole thing goes. All right, let's break this down, because two parts here are absolutely key. First, it's a public act. Protests are designed to be seen and heard. They're not a secret. And second, the goal is to influence opinion or decisions. This isn't just venting. It's a strategic move designed to change hearts, minds, and ultimately the rules we live by. And listen, this is nothing new. I mean, in ancient Rome, the common folks would literally just walk out of the city, secede, to force the ruling class to the negotiating table. Fast forward to 1773, you've got the Boston Tea Party, all about taxation without representation. Then, in 1963, the March on Washington becomes this landmark moment for civil rights. And just think about 2011, when the Arab Spring showed us how social media could fuel demonstrations that brought down entire regimes. The tools change, the context changes, but that basic act of public objection, it's timeless. Now, this brings us to a huge fork in the road for any protest movement, that fundamental strategic choice between nonviolence and violence. The methods chosen here are so critical because they completely shape the outcome. Nonviolence tries to win over the public, to build what Gandhi called soul force, a kind of moral authority. Violence, on the other hand, is usually aiming for a quick result through force or shock value. But man, it comes with a huge risk of turning off potential allies and triggering a massive law and order crackdown. So let's zoom in on the nonviolent approach for a bit, because it's so much more than just one idea. It's actually a massive toolbox of very specific tactics. In fact, a scholar named Gene Sharp famously cataloged 198 different methods of nonviolent action. Sharp broke all these methods down into three main categories. First, you've got protest and persuasion. Think marches, signs, vigils. Then there's non-cooperation, which is all about refusing to play along. And finally, you have intervention, where you actively get in the way of the system. The real genius here is the idea behind it all, that power isn't absolute. It needs people to cooperate. And these categories are basically a roadmap for how to systematically take that cooperation away. And just look at that second category, non-cooperation, because the sheer scope of it is incredible. It's not just about not buying a certain product. It can be students going on strike, people refusing to pay their debts, boycotting an entire election, or even shutting down the whole economy. It's the simple but incredibly profound power of just saying no on a massive scale. And this just shows you how deep the playbook really goes. Even one single tactic, like a strike, isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It has this whole range of intensity, from a quick, symbolic walkout just to send a message, all the way up to a general strike that's designed to bring an entire economy to a screeching halt. Okay, so obviously protests keeps changing, especially now in the digital age. Technology has been a total game changer, and it's really a classic double-edged sword. On one hand, social media means you can mobilize people at lightning speed and get global attention. But on the other, you've got the risk of slacktivism, where a like or a share replaces real action, plus the constant threat of digital surveillance. Now, in modern protests, the story you often hear in the media is all about violence. But the data can tell a very different story. Take the George Floyd protests in 2020, for instance. A deep analysis found that an overwhelming 95% of those events were completely peaceful. The clashes and the property damage that got so much airtime, they actually made up a tiny fraction of what was really happening. So at the end of the day, after all the marching and all the shouting, what's the real impact? Do these actions actually work? Let's take a look at the very real effects protests can have. Believe it or not, protests can have real, measurable economic consequences. There was this one study that looked at the US from 1962 to 1990, and it found that for every single media mention of a protest, the stock market took a small but noticeable dip. It's proof that these actions can disrupt business as usual enough to make the financial world pay attention, and that's a language powerful institutions definitely understand. And all of this leaves us with a huge question for the future. In a world of social media hashtags, global networks, and ever-increasing digital surveillance, this timeless act of public protest is changing faster than ever before. The real question isn't if people will keep protesting, they will. The question is, how will they adapt their methods to make sure their voices are still heard?